On a cold November night in 1936, at Pinfang, China, an Imperial Army surgeon was amputating a patient suffering from severe frostbite. Once he was done, he left the patient in the snow to freeze to death. This was Dr. Shiroishi, and they were in Unit 731, a research center for human experimentation. Unit 731 is one of the history's worst atrocities, and beneath the horror lies something larger than a mad doctor. It is a reflection of the warped ideologies combined with ambition and what could become of us if the society had no morality. This is the story about Shiroishi and his empire of blood. As a warning, viewer discretion is advised. Shiroishi was born in 1892 into privilege. He grew up in a land-owning sake-making family in Chiba Prefecture. By custom, Ishii's family still wielded a kind of feudal dominance over the community. From childhood, he was treated as part of a superior class. This background instilled in him a sense that some people's bodies were expendable, a ruthless mindset that later perfectly aligned with Imperial Japan's supremacist ideologies. His personality reflected this entitlement. Classmates recalled Ishii as brash, arrogant, and pushy. While he was brilliant with an almost photographic memory, he alienated peers with his domineering style. Even as a young medical student, Ishii showed a chilling detachment from human life. He famously grew bacteria in petri dishes as if they were pets. This was not a sign of care, but of dispassionate control, living organisms reduced to playthings. In Unit 731, this attitude became literal. Prisoners were technically referred to as maruta or logs and held in log cabins as if they were lumber rather than human beings. For instance, detainee Hideo Shimizu later recalled finding jars of human body parts, heads, hands, and even a fetus preserved as specimen. Ishii admired Emperor Hirohito and believed deeply in Japan's divine mission in Asia. In public, he played up patriotism, insisting that his work would serve the emperor and the Japan's destiny by freeing Asia from Western dominion. Secretly, though, Ishii saw a path to power. In 1921, he joined the Imperial Army as a medical officer and quickly climbed the ranks. He even married into influential circles, wed to the daughter of his university's president, which boasted his status. Unit 731 would become another step in his ambitious climb. As one associate later said, Ishii was like a god to us. We thought what he was doing was necessary for our country. Ishii's obsession with germs began in medical school but found wartime purpose in biological warfare. Japan had signed the 1925 Geneva Protocol banning germ weapons, but Ishii saw an opportunity. In 1927, he began lobbying army brass for a bioweapons program. When a favorable nationalist government took power, Ishii's proposals finally succeeded. In 1931, the army created a biological warfare research program and made Ishii its head. By then, Ishii had also traveled in the West, studying Allied and German research and securing patronage from key leaders like Minister of War Sadeo Araki and General Nagata. Once in control, Ishii framed the work in stark military terms. He divided his agenda into defense versus assault research. At first, the unit produced vaccines to shield Japanese troops, but he quickly shifted to offensive assault research, designing ways to spread disease on enemy populations. As Ishii cryptically put in speeches, these experiments are for Japan's survival, but they must never touch our sacred soil. In this way, the imperial racist belief in Japanese supremacy justified every inhumane trial. In August 1936, just after Japan's brutal invasion of Manchuria, Ishii's empire came into being. Emperor Hirohito formally integrated Ishii's program into the Kwantung Army as the Epidemic Prevention and War Purification Department, headquartered at Pinfang in Harbin. Over time, it grew enormous. By the war's height, Unit 731 employed roughly 3,000 staff and sprawled across 150 buildings covering 6 square kilometers. The sprawling complex included factories to breed disease and even labs to raise plague-infected fleas. Hidden behind its innocuous name, it was in fact a state-sponsored bioweapons research and development center on a grand scale. Under Ishii's command, Unit 731 experimented on captive human beings in every way imaginable. Prisoners, mostly Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, but also some Russians, Koreans, and even a few Westerners were treated as objects. The official records dryly call them test subjects, but the doctors usually call them logs. The irony was tragic. The more they studied, the more they revealed victim victims full humanity. As a US scholar puts it, the doctors dehumanized the prisoners openly, yet simultaneously recognized their humanity because they sought data on the human body. Those who showed mercy by acknowledging a prisoner was human risked ridicule by peers. Experiments at Unit 731 included infecting prisoners with plague, anthrax, cholera, and other diseases, then observing them until death, vivisecting live victims without anesthesia to study organs, amputations and transplants, which included severing limbs, swapping arms, and freezing limbs for frostbite tests, weapons testing by strapping humans to bombs, flamethrower and bayonet trials, sexual torture, which included forced sexual assaults, disease transmission, and experiments on pregnant women and fetuses. Every experiment was a crime. Historians estimate at least 400,000 Chinese civilians ultimately perished in Japan's wartime biological attacks. Sometimes I look at my hands and I remember what I've done with these hands. What's really scary is I don't have any nightmares of what I've done, confessed one former Unit 731 physician, Gen Yausa. In other words, to these medical men, the depravity had become routine. These methods reveal that Ishii's team was not constrained by any principle of human research. In fact, racism was explicit. Many doctors assumed Japanese lives were infinitely more valuable. As one of Ishii's aides reportedly said, mercy depended on nationality. Japanese soil was sacred, but in China, all bets were off. So how could medical professionals commit such horror? The answer lies in ideology and social dynamics. Unit 731 was a prestigious assignment. Doctors volunteered or were eager to join, because in that militaristic regime, refusing an order was unthinkable. One account notes that rejecting a transfer to Unit 731 could end a medical career. It was considered an honor to be chosen. Inside, conformity was enforced. Staff were mocked if they showed pity or called prisoners human. According to witnesses, doctors were told that if they didn't perform these tests on Chinese, they will be used on Tokyo someday. That was how they rationalized it, as defending Japan by offensive research abroad. The unit's leaders encouraged this mindset. Ishii himself often invoked the greater good. A great doctor, like a great military commander, knows that sometimes a few lives must be sacrificed to save thousands. When this war is over, great doctors will be remembered. In reality, these motives were post hoc rationalizations. The chief cause was an obedience to authority, combined with nationalist zeal. Japan's wartime propaganda preached that spreading the plague among Chinese was a service to the emperor. Refusing could mean court-martial or suspicion of being unpatriotic. Group dynamics also mattered. Among these officers and scientists, brutality became normalized. One doctor admitted in 1942 that he saw vivisection so commonly, all for practice rather than research. It was routine for Japanese medics in China. Even after the war, many of these men still claimed their work was a patriotic duty. A Unit 731 physician, Kawashima, later claimed he slept soundly at night because he told himself it was for Japan's future. None of this excuses the crimes, of course, but it underscores that the tragedy was systemic. Ishii fostered an ideology of patriotic science. The state endorsed Unit 731. The army brass supported it. The society largely stayed silent or ignorant. When local Chinese authorities asked questions about missing villagers or rumors of bombs, Japanese commanders dismissed them. As Japan's defeat loomed in 1945, Ishii moved quickly to erase evidence. All remaining prisoners were killed. Just before the Soviets invaded Manchuria in August 1945, about 300 test subjects were gassed or poisoned, and roughly 600 Chinese and local laborers were executed. They blew up the buildings to destroy germ stocks, and Ishii himself ordered every officer to take the secret to the grave. He even distributed cyanide pills for suicide if capture was imminent. By the time Soviet troops arrived, Unit 731's horror was buried under ruins and ash. Locals would later describe stench and human remains when the site was excavated, but by then all Japanese paperwork was shredded or hidden. Two armies of the victors then fought over Unit 731's legacy. The Soviets captured a dozen researchers and held the famous Khabarovsk war crimes trial in 1949. 11 top men were convicted of germ warfare and sentenced to 2 to 25 years in labor camps. The Americans, meanwhile, quickly granted immunity to Ishii and his team in exchange for the research data. MacArthur's occupation authorities secretly promised them money and jobs for their files. U.S. Army War correspondent Murray Sanders negotiated this cover-up. Japanese scientists were never tried and were even given stipends. Ironically, Washington eventually reported that by 1943, its own bioweapons program had outpaced Japan's. So, the stolen data was of little real value. Still, the deal was done. Ishii and the others walked free as war criminals, their victims left with nothing. After the war, Ishii returned quietly to Tokyo. He set up a private clinic and even treated patients for free. Many of his former colleagues rejoined medical schools or government research, enjoying respectable careers, even publishing in journals. Japanese society largely never confronted these crimes until decades later. In fact, it took until 2002 for the Japanese code to formally acknowledge that Japan had used biological weapons in China. By then, Ishii himself was gone. He died of throat cancer in Tokyo in October 1959 at 67 years old. Only recently has more evidence come to light. In 2023 to 2025, Japanese archives have finally declassified many rooster lists and documents from other army germ units like Unit 1644 and 8604. These newly released records show dozens of names overlapping with Unit 731 staff and confirm a vast coordinated network of epidemic prevention divisions across Asia. As Asahi Shimbun reports, scholars say this disclosure could shed light on a coordinated network of germ warfare divisions. In other words, Unit 731 was not a solitary outlier, but the tip of a massive state program, a program that modern Japan is still uncovering. What brought about this nightmare of science gone wrong? It was not a lone madman working in a vacuum. Ishii's atrocities were enabled by his environment, society, and warped motivations. A rigid feudal upbringing and racist imperial ideology convinced him that Chinese lives didn't count. A cult of nationalist patriotism told his subordinates that genocide was honorable service to the emperor. Wartime fear and ambition made refusal impossible for most doctors. Even afterward, prestige and ideology kept the truth buried. Early post-war medicine in Japan welcomed ex-Unit 731 researchers, valuing their experience. History warns us that under certain conditions, ordinary people can commit unspeakable crimes. Unit 731 shows how a breakdown of ethical norms fostered by hierarchy, propaganda, and groupthink led smart, trained physicians view torture as just another experiment. Many scholars now believe that these men did recognize the victims' humanity at some level, but needed to rationalize the killing. Whatever the psychology, the result was the same: massive torture and death, all in the name of science. As we look back, we must ask, could this ever happen again? History's lesson is that it can, unless we remain vigilant. When ideology and power uncheck morality, any field, even healing, can be twisted into a weapon. The story of Ishii and Unit 731 is a grim reminder that an entire society can fall into atrocity if it excuses cruelty by nationalism or experience. Perhaps that is the hardest legacy of all. A warning that the worst actions of humanity often do not come from isolated evil, but from broad failure of individuals, institutions, and the society that let them be.